Good morning, friends. The reading pointed out a few items which we're going to go into in a little more detail as we progress in the talk today. First, I'd like to call our attention to the illustration of the sevenfold nature of man, because we're going to be referring to certain categories very often during the talk. Atma being the one principle that the first speaker referred to, the all. Buddhi being the vehicle of Atma, and Manas, the higher Manas, is called, or Buddhi Manas. Those are the three principles that go from life to life in the cosmos as well as in humanity, because we are microcosms of the macrocosm of all that is. We have elements of those same principles within us. And then the four natures of man, which we commonly live in from day to day, many of us not giving much thought to the higher principles. Manas, the lower Manas, which is our working mind on a day-to-day basis, our calculating mind, etc., what we need to have to get by in the physical world, in this world of competition, etc. The body, the physical body, which is the transporter of all of these principles. The astral body, which is a copy of the physical body on the astral plane. The jiva, or the life principle, often called passions and desires and other names, which is the force that brings all of this together. On a day-to-day basis, something like electricity, we can think of it as. So the overall objective, we're talking about the ANTASKARANA bridge today, which connects the higher Manas and the lower Manas. If we have any activity, we would hope that many of us do some activity in the higher Manas arena. The idea, the principle is to go from this lower Manas being in the ascendancy in our world of competition to the higher Manas being in control of all of these principles. So this word ANTASKARANA that HPB introduced us to from the Sanskrit, Anta, broken down, Ata, Karana, in short, it's between two causes, which is to bring together this idea of the higher and the lower Manas in the case of the illustration. But if that's all we get out of today's talk, we won't get much. So ANTASKARANA means a lot more than that, and we'll go into that a little bit more. If we look in the Theosophical Glossary, which is with here, the words for that ANTASKARANA means the path or bridge between the higher and the lower Manas, the divine ego, and the personal soul of man. It serves as a medium of communication between the two and conveys from the lower to the higher ego. Note, lower to higher. It does go both ways, but we have to activate the lower to really get to the higher, and we have to do that through our own self-induced and self-devised methods. Everybody around us, the masters and all of those being out there, especially the masters, show us that we can get to the point of perfection. Okay, going from the lower to the higher, all those personal impressions and thoughts of men which can, by their nature, be assimilated and stored by the undying entity, the three higher principles, and be thus made immortal with it, these being the only elements of the evanescent personality that survive death and time. It thus stands to reason that only that which is noble, spiritual, and divine in man can testify in eternity to his having lived. That's what goes on from life to life. As we perfect whatever parts we get perfected during this life, gets assimilated during the afterlife phase typically. We'll get into that a little bit more. to the point where that goes from life to life. This other part doesn't disappear because it waits for us until we return to this life to carry on our effort of perfecting ourselves through service to others. So the first thing we wanted to kind of touch on is the bridge of communication, because without that bridge we lose these ideas, as has been lost in the current generation to a great extent. That's why HPB introduced these Sanskrit words to us. To the ignorant, which most of us are in this world, we're dealing with the English language, etc. These are foreign to us, but it's incumbent on us to try to at least get an understanding of what these words mean in order to return to the higher, to the spiritual life that we're talking about here. So, and this is not unusual. Our physiologists, our chemists, and so forth have gone through this process in defining the various departments of body and of nature, in connecting and how they work, etc. So they've invented a huge number of terms, primarily from the Greek and Latin, and bringing that into the English language. And the whole idea that, is that we would get back into contact with that which we have lost. Something like Crusoe did. When he was abandoned, or he was stranded, he found himself stranded. That was his karma, to be stranded. But he activated his will to first make the best use of whatever he had available, and step to step getting back to what he had lost in that life. We do that if we work at it through the course, starting with the course of our physical existence to a degree, but we need to keep working on streamlining things, so eventually this ANTASKARANA bridge, which connects the lower to the higher, in short, eventually disappears when the higher manas takes charge. So HPB introduces the terms that we have, like for example the term of metaphysics. Most people have never heard of this term, or many people have not, and those few who may have heard of it probably don't know really what it means. So this branch of science, it is a science that HPB's introduced to us, to all these words, etc., help us in our understanding of this process, and frequently refer to it as religion, but it really, she laid it out as a science. For example, in psychology, we might think we know a lot about psychology, but we're pretty ignorant of psychology if we take out this piece up here. And initially, that's what was happening. We have more and more psychologists that start recognizing this higher part of us. But it's a growing process. But at one time, the people of old actually had psychology as an exact science. They understood once they, they had all these principles together, and they knew how man operated, so very much like the physiologists, etc., do today in today's science. So it is our karma to be where we're at today, like Crusoe, but we can get out of that and get back to what we have lost in past generations through our will. We have to activate our own will. Nobody, HPB, nobody else, the masters, nobody else is going to do that work for us. We have to do it ourselves. So the present day message of Theosophy has a pretty complete, comprehensive exposition of the states of man between the death of the body and the new birth. All of these would involve probably separate talks and etc. But let's leave it at that for right now. you know, when our friends die, etc., we have this flare-up of interest in the after-death states, but it typically goes away. But if we really want to gain knowledge, it doesn't go, these ideas stay with us all the time, and we ponder on them as to what the really real meaning is. The theosophical teachings, if we don't do that, will appear no different than the dogmas of a religion, etc. today. In other words, knowledge truly becomes ours when we use it. We have to first dwell on it. We have to put it into practice. Then it is ours. We can learn to say it, which is important, but until we live it, it's not ours. So that, we're bringing in the idea of death, that which occurs involuntarily after the death of the body may be accomplished voluntarily during body existence. And such accomplishment is linked to yoga, which is Raja Yoga. We have to be more specific these days because Hatha Yoga is in there now too. HPB has warnings about Hatha Yoga, but Raja Yoga, or meditation on these matters, eventually 24 hours a day, but even initially there's a process that's recommended, which we can talk about, which we've actually have separate talks about. So the first speaker read this instruction from the voice of the silence, that we have to sacrifice the personal to the impersonal self, thus destroy the path between the two ANTASKARANA, even before we stand on the threshold of the path. That's, you know, before we get really started on this path, we have to do that. And it's often said there's as many ways to getting there as there are heads on a human head. I think Muhammad said that. But that path is also straight and narrow, and it gets down to being able to start with a clean heart, a clean mind, and devotion to these principles. So in this footnote on the ANTASKARANA, the lower manas, or the kama manas, that part is defined. It's the path of communication or communion between the personality and the higher. The manas, the buddhi manas, is also referred to in that footnote. To destroy the path between the personal and the self-impersonal would therefore mean the killing out of desire and of the mere thirst for sentient existence, feelings, etc., good and bad and things like that. So this does not mean subduing. It says killing it out. So in effect, by doing that, we then merge the two and become starts to be there from life to life. And at that stage, we remember our past existences, which we do not now, and we are, in effect, if we follow the right path, perfected beings. And we are fully aware whether we're in the body or not. We choose to be in the body at certain times. Some of those who arrive there, many of those who do, in order to help our brethren who have been left here, such as the Buddha. So these are the basic concepts. Another golden precept in the voice says, before the first speaker read, before that path is entered, thou must again also destroy thy lunar body, cleanse thy mind body, and make clean thy heart. And the footnote there talks about the lunar body as the astral form is produced by the kamic principle, which is a lower nature, the kama rupa, or a body of desire. This is the shell, if you want to call it that. So it talks about the first the manasa rupa. There's a lot of terms that HPB introduces us to. The first referring to the astral or the personal self, and the second to the individuality or the higher self, or the reincarnating ego. So this precept in the voice and the footnotes shows the necessity of overcoming those conditions and limitations which make possible the involuntary passage of the ego in Kamaloka and Devachan. So right now we are involuntarily passing, we just die. And we go through this process involuntarily. The idea of the whole process here is to make this a voluntary process so that we as individuals are in control of all of this. So after the disciple conquers the course of desires, making up his lunar body and causing the deposit of the Kama Rupa, he has to overcome those subtler desires which, though not necessarily bad, are still partial and spiritually selfish. Thus, the pledge of Kuan Yin, which is over there near the wall, never will I enter into final peace alone and leave behind those who are still struggling. These latter desires enter into the very warp and woof of Manasarupa, which is the not really bad but spiritually selfish desires. The reincarnating ego has to deal with that, and it could cause a long devachanic dream. And I'm going to read a quote from Mr. Judge on that in a second. So practical Theosophy teaches the necessity of disentangling the ego from those sattvic desires, which are again not necessarily bad, but still have a tinge of selfishness. In the words quoted in the footnote, the consciousness of the reincarnating ego on our plane, or the lower manas, has to be paralyzed. This has to be there, has to be paralyzed. This has to be in control. It goes on in the voice to say the smallest wave of longing or regret for Maya's gift. Maya is the elusive world of this life. Going along the ANTASKARANA, the smallest wave of longing or regret for Maya's gifts, the ANTASKARANA, the path lies between the spirit and thyself, the highway of sensations, it describes it as, the rude arousals of ahankara. A thought as fleeting as a lightning flash will make thy three prizes, which is the keys are Dana, Shila, and Shanti, which are detailed in the voice as to what they mean, which is a path to the divinity. In other words, perfection of generosity, ethics, and patience, as the voice defines it, forfeit the prizes thou hast won. So it's a tough path. One has to be pure to even enter that path. Reading from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, I wanted to close this idea with Krishna's warning against those actions and ceremonies which will lead to the coveted sojourn in heaven for an immense period of time. And Mr. Judge explains in the notes to the Bhagavad Gita words to this effect. Doubtless there are many students who, believing in the possibility of reaching heaven, say that they are willing to take the risk of what may happen after the enjoyment of such a long period has ended. But those risks would not be taken were they well understood. They are numerous and great, he said. Many of them cannot be stated, because in order to understand at all, more must be known of the power of mind and the real meaning of meditation, hence the importance of Raja Yoga. But the ordinary risks are found in what we may roughly, for the present, call delayed karma and unspent affinities. The power of these two has its root in the vast complexity of man's nature. Such is its complexity that a man cannot, as a complete being, ever enjoy heaven or any state short of union with the divine. Learned Theosophists, Mr. Judge says, talk of a man's going to Devachan and of his being here on earth, suffering or enjoying karma, when, as a fact, only a small part of him is either here or there. When he has lived out his life and gone to Devachan, the vast root of his being stands waiting in the one life, waiting patiently for him to return and exhaust some more karma. That is, any one life, the ordinary man only takes up and exhausts what karma his body permits. Part of the power of karma is in the mysterious power of meditation, which exhibits itself according to the particular corporal body one has assumed. So the man may, in this life, perform special ceremonies and conform to text and doctrines, attaining thereby the reward of heaven. Krishna says, I will not abandon you if you do that. So I think that's what Mr. Judge is putting in words here. And still have left over a quantity of that mysterious power of meditation unexpended. And what its complexion is, he does not know. Its risk, therefore, is that it may be very bad, and when he does return from heaven, his next body may furnish the needed apparatus to bring up to the front this mass of unexpended karma, and his next compensation might be a sojourn in hell. And my time is about up. I wanted to hit a few quick quotes. This ANTASKARANA, as portrayed here, it gets personal. It's our individuality here exhibiting itself and eventually working itself up into the three here. But that's only on an individual basis. We have cosmic definitions that fit into that too. And we have, as this student talked about a little earlier, we interact with each other. And these are, in effect, ANTASKARANA bridges too. The masters, once we get to a point where we're ready for the teacher to appear, and etc., this process continues to go on and on. So we do have this help all around us, but we have to use our discrimination and work on this from within. So, in short, I'm going to mention a couple things here. We have to cleanse all thoughts and actions of personal dross. There is no awakening from the devachanic state until the purifying process is completed. So that's why Mr. Judge goes into all this about this sojourn in heaven. That process, even that has to be completed, although it may be up part of the upper three while we're in the death state. But this purification process has to be completed. So the purpose of the true devotee is to bring his full echoic consciousness to bear on this plane by removing all impediments in his way. The process culminates in the merging of the two into the one by the sacrifice of the personal to the self-impersonal, and therefore becoming an ANTASKARANA bridge for all. Thank you. I'll open it for comments and questions.